Look at this. It's another cave.
Whoa, really?
Yeah. That's an archaeological artifact. Oh, look how far down it goes. Do you want me to put the camera away and help? Whoa! Over there is... Oh! Yeah, again, those double bumps on top of the head. The eye. Oh, Lord.
I'm alright.
Well, you're saying you're alright. It doesn't look like it. Right, I need to stop filming. This is too dangerous.
In the late 1960s, archaeologists exploring central Colombia identified 3 late Pleistocene sites, including the Alhambra rock shelters, dated to 10,400 BC, which feature hundreds of red ochre pictograms, petroglyphs, and megafauna remains. It is known Alhambra was situated on the shoreline of the Great Paleo Lake Humboldt at 2,570 meters, or 8,430 feet above sea level. We plotted this altitude across hills in the Bogota Sabana, revealing a series of Ice Age islands. In our last documentary, we presented a rediscovery of a site featuring pictograms, petroglyphs, and giant reptile and megafauna sculptures. And this film pushes westwards, exploring another Ice Age island in the savannah. Above the town of Tenjo, the foothills of La Peña de Huayca are riddled with caves and sacred indigenous shrines, featuring hundreds of pictograms and 26 enormous monoliths, which were abandoned in the 16th century after the arrival of the Spanish conquistadors, where we rediscover a rare ceramic artifact hidden in a deep cave chamber and further evidence of megafauna monumentalization.
Welcome to another episode of History Fuzz. We'll leave the introductory movie right there because we're going to pick up our presentation from the Tenjo monoliths and caves in the town of Tenjo in Cundinamarca, Colombia. But what I'm going to do first is bring up my friend and colleague, Jay Parker.
Hi, Ash. Hi, everyone that's joined us. It's a pleasure to be here, as always.
Indeed. So, Jay, what I'm going to do is go back and turn your mic down a bit because I ruined it when it went live. Hold on 2 ticks. There we go. We're good.
We're good?
Yeah, welcome everybody again. Thanks for joining us on the live stream. And for those who are watching it retrospectively in the future, what we're going to do here is a walk-through slideshow presenting the discoveries in our last installation of our explorations in Colombia. We filmed at a popular site in 1960s Colombia where a lot of archaeologists monitored and mapped several hundred red ochre pictograms on large round stones within a cave system known as the Cuevas de Tenjo. To put the place in context before we start looking at it, the Cuevas de Tenjo were utilized from about 600 AD to 1537 when the conquistadors arrived, and they were known as the Cucas Seminarios, the cave college, if you like, where the sons of local rulers, Kazakis, and the sons of Zipas, or culture-wide leaders to be, would be educated in what was recorded in the 16th century as communications, arithmetic, mythology, astronomy, and landscape surveying. So after 7 years of meditation within a cave chamber where they were starved and dehydrated and resuscitated continually for 7 years, once they had broken all ego, if you like, it was to take the ego away, like an intense army training course, they were introduced to the next 7 years of the educational rites. And after year 12, on the turn of the 13th year, in synchronization with the lunar calendar, the new rulers would emerge from the cave, which was symbolic of a womb, the womb of Chia, the moon goddess, the patron of these rulers, or the patrona. So these caves were a college-like institution that collapsed upon the arrival of the conquistadors. The caves themselves are set on a mountain range called La Peña de Huayca. What I'll do is start our slideshow here and put this place in context. La Peña de Huayca is one of three, or I should say 4 major, you would call them straps of mountains in the Bogota Sabana. There are 3. There's the Eastern Mountain Range, the Mahoy Range, the Peña de Huayca Range, and the Tablazo Range. And these were all Ice Age islands until about 9,000 BC. The lagoon line started to drop, and these, you would say, are more like hills than islands. But from at least 30,000 BC, when this ancient Paleo lake reduced, those 4 island lines, including La Peña de Huayca that you're seeing, were hunted on by late Pleistocene hunters that resided. It's known at El Abra, which is about 20 miles, about 30 kilometers away from La Peña de Huayca. So it's the same environment, 4 Ice Age islands, and we explored the peak down at the lowest part here of the La Peña de Huayca range. I'm not even going to start with the mythology and the history of La Peña de Huayca. That's another film for another time. You can see us here 3 years ago. A team of 8 of us were exploring this here, which is the Mahoy range, and it overlooks the La Peña de Huayca range. This here that you can see that's green in this image, that was up at 10,400 BC when the Labra was populated. That was a lagoon. So if you can imagine that as a lagoon, the team here are about 200 meters higher than the lake line at 10,400 BC. And Jay and I explored here in our last film at Tenjo. Jay, can you give the audience a kind of an insight into what it was like being inside this cave system before we start exploring it and showing what's in there? What was it like for you to walk into that?
It was very ethereal, slightly claustrophobic, obviously. And for anyone that's seen the film, it had a sense of danger, as always when one is kind of inside the entrails of the earth. It was definitely, or definitely could be seen as a spiritual place. Obviously, the ancient people here, the ancient cultures saw it as that. And ascending down, the further down you got, the more ethereal it became. There was some strange lights coming in. There was daylight coming in that illuminated certain stones and certain aspects. It was a great experience, actually. For me, it's the first time I've been in there. I know you've been in there before, Ash. It was actually a lot deeper than I expected. I wasn't expecting it to be such a descent down into the different chambers.
Yeah, Jay, we should probably point out there that the Cuevas de Tenjo are accessible to the public. That what you're about to see in the first 4 slides with the big pictogram there in the middle, that's a modern rendition. But this here, the Cucas Seminarios, is protected and worshipped at with offerings by the Muiscas, the modern Muiscas around Tenjo. The indigenous reserve surrounds these caves, and it's opened at the weekends, and people can visit these caves. However, what Jay and I did was spend about 2 or 3 hours in these caves looking for any evidence at all of Ice Age occupation, and then we proceeded up above and beyond the tourist line right into the, you would call them uncharted hills, right, Jay? Because there's nobody goes up there.
No one really goes up there. As we can see from the artifact that we found in the cave, it's not been explored. It's very few people venture up there, and it's quite treacherous terrain, to be fair. It's not where you'd go for a Sunday stroll with the family or with the dog or something like that. It's a little bit off the beaten path.
And downright dangerous. Because there's
downright dangerous.
Yeah, really. I mean, we saw what happened in the cave. We'll go over that. Yeah. Here's an example of one of the one of the pictograms on one of the Tenjo monoliths. As I said, 26 enormous stones surrounding the cave. This is on one of the lower ones. So the argument between archaeologists for 40 years, 50 years has been, does this represent two hilltops or two valleys, or does it represent a serpent? Jay, what do you think that represents? Look here.
Honestly, it could be either of the two. It has no distinct head on it, and it really has no distinct tail on it.
Mm-hmm.
It's open to interpretation. We cannot say. It could be either of the two. To be a serpent, a snake, for me, it's a little bit too triangular. I would say perhaps that represents a landscape more than an actual animal. The zoomorphic figures that they did make are quite identifiable.
Yeah. The thing that gets me about it is if you were drawing a landscape, say two mountains, then you could do that with the top two triangles. Why would you then put two smaller mountains in the foreground, right? That seems to me to go back to serpent then.
Maybe it's a sense of perspective, that there's one bigger mountain behind a smaller mountain.
Yeah, okay. So let's do this. You and I have become, I would almost say professionals, but I'm not going to. We've become very good at spotting where eyes have been added to rocks to turn that rock into an animal. Look there. Doesn't that represent an eye potentially, or the one in front of it? See the circle? Because there's not one here.
But then it doesn't have the serpent head shape. And as I say, they were quite distinct when they drew zoomorphic figures.
Yep.
Perhaps they were trying to interpret both of those things that we're suggesting, that it was a serpent moving across the landscape.
And that the hill lines, these long protrusions of hills or islands, were serpents themselves. It's not the first time people have called the Mohoy Range the serpent. Yeah. So there's a good example, the last 3 minutes of Jay going for landscape and me going for a zoomorphic form. And that's the argument that exists over the nature of the Tenjo pictograms. This one in particular is dated to 6000 BC, 8,000 years ago. But the archaeologists who interpreted this always leave it open, saying, but most probably, and perhaps younger, because this is very similar to the examples found across the savannah at Elabra, dating to 10,400 BC. So that's where we are with the Tenjo pictograms. I want to show you another example. And the reason I pulled this up is it's known as representing the Birdman, the transition between shaman with a bird head, but which has been defined as a bird head, not a head, but a mask. Now, in the Lascaux cave in France, dating to 16,000 BC, famously, is a birdman, a shaman with a bird's mask transitioning, and it's again found in some very early sites in North America. The general archaeological interpretation is that the birdman emerged in different cultures at around the same time, late Pleistocene, 16,000 BC, and it was definitely it originated as one of the first zoomorphic or anthropomorphic forms showing this shamanic transition. So we have a beautiful example here of the Birdman for all those people out there that are fascinated by just that topic alone of this shamanal transition. These I haven't seen these in any of the rock art websites in Colombia, not even the best of them. This appears underneath the boulder. We came across it in 2019. It's in the caves themselves, but like in a wing of the caves. So underneath there are these. Do you know something? I forget. I fail to remember. Jay, could you count those lines as I'm rattling on? This is a definite geometric form where the lines are
13.
Yeah, there's 13. So that's right. We put this in context of either the 13 lunations of a solar year, or all of the other references there are, because these caves were dedicated and, if you like, overseen by Chia, the goddess of the moon, who all calendars were swung around her cycles. Everything was pinned down by her cycles, ritually, civically, and agriculturally. So it might be a coincidence that there's 13 lines, or it could perhaps relate to the significance between Chia, the moon, and the caves that we found these in. What do you think about that, Jay? Do you think that's just luck?
Well, also in Fontainebleau, if I'm correct, and correct me if I'm wrong, they also included 13 in the interpretations of the markings that are inside the caves there. This is a recurring theme throughout ancient cultures. Maybe it is to do with the solar or the lunar cycles, but 13 seems to be a very peculiar number to choose.
With having interviewed so many archaeoastronomers, 32 of them over the last year, every one of them would argue about the significance of numerology because they're very skeptical when it comes to it. But what all of them repeat is this: there are 13 days between the new moon and the full moon, and that must have been acknowledged, and it probably accounts for most of the representations of 13. In modern archaeoastronomy, everything in Romanic times, the argument there is that they could, once they had the 360-degree circle worked out, that the moon moves 13 degrees on the horizon every night. So you could argue between the two, but the number 13 is absolutely related to the lunar solar cycle, Jay. Both.
It's
how many full moons are there in a year? Well, there's 13 full moons in the solar year, 13 degrees on the horizon every night, and 13 days between new and full. So, hey, we'll never know, but probably not coincidence.
Probably not. I'd agree with that.
With the other lunar symbology in the cave, I wish I could show them here, but there's a wonderful resource for all this, guys. I highly suggest you visit Jay, can you do it in Spanish? What's the great rock art website that guy Diego runs?
It's called Patrimonio y Arqueología de Colombia.
What's rock art? What's that? Respuesta?
Arte rupestre.
That there, if you Arte Rupestre, there's a website that has all of the pictograms in the caves that have been looked at, and there's some beautiful renditions of the moon, of the triple moon goddess, triangles within circles. So Colombian archaeologists have certainly identified these pictograms with the lunar cycles and lunar worship. So that's not coming from us. They just don't know about this one with the 13 lines yet. Moving on, as we go up and above the Cuevas de Tenjo, the bits that the tourists can visit, we entered a secondary cave system, and there's no facilities, no posts, no signs. This is when we start to get up about, at this point, when we're going into the secondary cave system, we're about 100 meters above the Ice Age lagoon line. So everything you're going to see in this documentary of ours is exploring about between 100 and 300 meters above the 10,400 BC lagoon line. And the primary discovery that we'll get to, the carved Mastodon, that is on where the lagoon line was about between 14 and 16,000 BC. Disclaimer, I'm not saying that's how old the carving is. I'm saying that was the lagoon line. Jay, did I share that with you? That Mastodon that we're coming to is on the 15,000 BC lagoon line.
Yes.
So either people from 10,4 BC did it higher up the mountain, or Pibenza's may be correct to be dated at 14,000 BC. This is the most beautiful action shot I've ever taken. This is Jay making his way up through the caves, and there's this shaft of light that he explained in the first few minutes of the talk today. A shaft of light beaming through. He kicked up the dust. But to me, in this sacred cave system, that kind of effect was recognized in prehistory as a hierophany. A hierophany defined in the dictionary as a visual manifestation of the sacred in our world. Yeah, they wouldn't have missed that.
It does look very ethereal, definitely.
It's incredible. And Jay, I'm going to throw this in for a laugh because, of course, you and I suffer deep pareidolia. Look at this damn rock here, and look at that.
I'm seeing that now, actually, for the first time, because I haven't seen this as a still before. It's always been in a video motion.
Yeah.
And it has a hole in it. I mean, we could from pure pareidolia, we could interpret that as an eye. We'd have to get back there and look at it and look at the perception and the light, because especially in a cave system like this, light really does play tricks on the eyes.
Come on then. What do you see? Give me an animal. I'll give you mine.
Turtle head.
Okay, I see this as the bulbous back of the condor head with the hooked beak coming down. This would be the nostril or the eye. See if there's a hole there where the eye would be. That's a nostril and that's a beak. But again, this is just playing with shapes and clouds. That's not what we're here to do. I just noticed it just now and thought, look at that. Yep.
As I say, you get in there and you see that from a different angle with a different perspective of light. The shadows change, and it's a very ethereal place. And really, if you did let your mind play tricks with you, you'd be seeing things in every shadow that you came across.
Yeah. And you're right. But one of the reasons we could almost say this is pareidolia, not an animal, is this, because you're right to say we've only seen this in this one still. It might be the case that every other 360.9 degrees, that doesn't exist. It's just on that one shot, you know. So look, we're going to get straight to Jay's absolutely outstanding archaeological discovery of an ancient ceramic bowl at the deepest part of the secondary cave system. We found a rock shelter about 5 or 6 meters wide. It's all in the documentary. It'll be linked to this at the end, and it's in the description. He clambered off up into this back channel, regardless of possible collapse. He didn't need to lift more than a millimeter of topsoil, and what he found under his hands. Jay, go for it. Tell people what you found there.
This is a very small handmade clay pot. We know it's handmade because we can see the finger details around it, where it was pressed, where it was pushed together, where it was formed, inside at the bottom, where they pushed down with their thumb to form that shape. I'm no expert in this, but I do have a reference base, as does Ashley. This is pre-Muisca. The Muiscas were renowned for their ceramic work and their fantastic pottery. And there are literally hundreds of thousands of examples of this in museums and that have been found. This is very crude compared to a Muisca. I mean, it could have been handmade by a child or by a farmer. We cannot discount that. But it's much more similar and in the vein of the pre-Muisca ceramic work, which is Herrera, which pushes it back just a little bit further. It wasn't deeply buried, as Ashley said. It was probably just a few millimeters under, and it was covered with a little cap of dust, but it was sitting on a rock bed inside the cave, which is like a layer of rock tables and then a space to get in on top of them. We really didn't stay to keep looking and to keep investigating. One, we were limited by time. Two, perhaps it wasn't the safest place to be for too long. Perhaps pushing our luck.
I think it's important there that we tell people this, so people have got what we're doing here in context. The reason we didn't stay and explore further is because we're limited to visual exploration. Not once, and never will we, dig so much as a centimeter into the soil of Colombia, breaking every heritage law out there. When we find something in an unexplored location, if it's sitting on the topsoil, we will look at that and investigate and explore it. And we're going to share it with everybody, but we certainly don't have permissions to be digging anywhere. So you can see beautifully, this has been exposed. It's not been covered in earth. It's not been encrusted in anything. So Jay, I've got a question for you. Yeah. So remember on the day when you found it, the excitement was up, and we were in the back of that cave, and I took it from you and I set it down, and you said, you asked the question, you said, shouldn't you remove that stupid bit of fluff before we film it? And I said, let's not even do as much as remove the fluff. Let's leave this completely untouched. Natural. So now in hindsight, looking at it, let me run this past you. While this certainly matches ceramics in the Harara period, and for folks out there, the Harara would match up to the British Neolithic, roughly. Yeah. Perhaps that is cotton, Jay, And maybe it's more modern than we think, and that it's a more modern Muisca offering, because we know the cotton is more valuable than gold to the Muisca. What do you think?
As I say, it's not something that we can discount. That could have been made by a normal farmer, even a child, a handmade pot.
Yeah,
could have been left there. But looking at the stylization of it and the way it's made,
yeah,
the Muiscas have mastered this. I mean, unless we actually do some tests on it, we go back and take it out the cave and bring it back and do some tests on it. We will never know. Looking at the photos we took, and this is why we removed it, to put it in the light, to take the photos, to have it as a point of reference from different angles.
Yeah,
we can only wait for an expert in his field to come back and say what that is.
okay.
Speculatively, having seen Muisca ceramics and things like that, I personally believe it's not.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm with you. I challenged you there because I think it's important we do that to each other. But here's the thing, Jay. So that pot matches examples of, so the oldest ceramics discovered in Colombia, yeah, the oldest ceramics were found behind me here in the Chia-Tequisa Gap. They're dated to 2200 BC in the Harara period. But by that time, they had agricultural vases for holding seed. They had drinking urns, and they didn't have, while there was no signs of even glazing at that time, they had perfected the smoothness and the symmetry of the vases. So that tells me that that you found is perhaps earlier than that, rather than more modern. And that bit of fluff was just blowing through the air. What do you think of that?
It's a possibility, and there was quite a lot of fluff and other debris in the cave, and obviously over the years it would have built up. I think something that has stopped it becoming trapped under such a dense layer of that is because it was sat on a base of rock and just had this layer of dust on it. The wind does blow in there,
yeah,
which would stop that build up as well. A strong wind in there would easily blow the dust away and keep it in a stable position and conserve it as well, and conserve a temperature.
Yeah.
Looking at it, it looks old. It does look very old. It's not glazed. It's not really stylized. But then on the other hand, we can argue that perhaps it was made by a simple farmer, a simple person who wanted to make that offering.
In that cave, and in all Indian cultures, you know, in the Christian world, we give our divine authority to something above us in the sky, but in the ancient Andean world, divine authority was given to the deepest parts of caves. These are the cenotes of Mayas, or the Aztecs of Mexico, all the way down to the Paracas of Peru. They went to the deepest point, and that was their point of connection with the underworld. And that's where you found this, Jay, right at the deepest point where this world said to merge with the underworld. I think it's incredible. So let's tell the audience where we are with this. As we said earlier, we're not taking things, we're finding things, we're filming them and giving them to everybody, but we leave things in situ. But what we did do was photograph high resolution this entire pot. So we've got de-stretch images coming soon, and we're going to have an opinion on, can you see it, Jay? That circular mark on the side of the pot. We might be able to identify tools by the markings on the pots, but the de-stretch images are going to do is reveal a lot of information about the type of clay that was used. And without touching the thing, without taking samples, we might be able to date it through this visual de-stretch software, which shows different light bands, and you can age the light bands. So that's exciting. And we'll come back on and do a live purely about the pot. We'll share close-ups of it. We'll share the de-stretch results that aren't coming from us. They're coming from another archaeologist who's seen this, who is also convinced it's pre-Harara, meaning a really, really old pot, one of the oldest examples in the country, Jay. I wouldn't say that unless it was possible.
I wasn't actually aware of that. Ash, thanks for telling me that, man. And that puts a smile on my face, man. I knew it was old.
So the idea is this green. See this here, this green. So with the de-stretch will show if that's a moss on top of the thing, or if that's actual coloration in the clay. Maybe say there's copper in the clay. Well, over a certain time, that copper would come through, permeate to the surface of the clay as the clay deteriorates. So that D-stretch can start giving us data with that saying, well, look, if that's in the clay, it's no younger than this date. We'll never get an exact date of when it was created, but we can pull and push the levels, the parameters.
We can get a time frame
of
to aim for. Yeah.
You've got it. And we're not even bringing into consideration yet where we actually found the thing, because this here, I put this graphic in to show you that this cave system, we went up in over under here, but this here is an enormous, several thousand, tens of thousands of tons large rock that this cave is beneath. So we'll come to the significance of that rock shortly, but there we go. There's the bowl, Jay's holy grail. I don't think you'll find anything like that again until we go out again, right?
Maybe on Saturday.
Maybe on Saturday, that's the truth. All right, so let's have a look here. Let's just dive straight into the animals, guys. This is where we go. So Jay and I went up a path. We went up several and we got lost. And we didn't have a reason for going up this one apart from we thought we can get a view back down over where we've been. We're about halfway up the Tenjo Hills on the foothills of La Peña de Huayca. There were no paths. There was just channels through the trees. And we came across what we thought was a monolith, but it was just a small white rock. Appears to be untouched. But when we looked about 300 meters back north, that's what appeared in front of us. This rock right here. When we overlaid the Mastodon figures over the actual rock, it appeared to have a trunk and an eye. This is all retrospectively. So these here are the 7 points of anatomical, if you like, confirmation that someone perhaps in prehistory tried to represent an elephant with no more than creating an eye, smoothing a trunk, and creating the defining hump and the raised cranial formation at the top of the head. So we got all excited seeing this rock and basically ran our way back over, and we got underneath the rock. So from underneath this rock looking up, you can see here on the left what we actually saw, and you can see the differences are so few between the mastodon, the Mastodon that was discovered at Labra dating to 10,400 BC, the example that we presented in our first reptile temple film of the mastodon, and this here again, which looks exceptionally like the Mastodon, especially with this raised cranial shelf. Jay, let me go into the next slide and let you talk about this, because you called me round to the other side of this stone. Let's just flick back quickly. The B side of this face is this. There we go. Go for it, Jay. What are we looking at?
Okay. First of all, I'd like to point out that we actually spotted this from, like Ashley says, 300 meters. We were sat having our sandwiches, and we dropped our sandwiches when we saw this. Totally. And it was we couldn't believe it. Ashley said to me, "Do you see that? What is it?" And I just, it's a mammoth, and it was. And it's undeniable. There's so many points of reference here that are anatomically correct, that are dimensionally correct. The size of the thing, and it's mirrored on both sides. It's not been eroded down one side and then the other side is just bare rock. This is a 3D detailed image, down to the smoothing on the trunk, the scaling on the skin, the eyes, the crown on the head. This is probably the most undeniably clear one that I've ever seen. This is perhaps clearer than the ones in Fontainebleau in France.
Yeah, I agree. The reason we can't show the full thing with the extended trunk, because at the bottom of that trunk is a big carved out section. You can see it in the documentary. If you press pause, the end of the trunk or the beginning of the legs, where that meeting point happens, there's a very smoothed out, meter deep section. And that image represents my camera, as close as I could get and as much as I could get in. This stone is about 10 meters high, Jay? 10 meters? That there is 2 meters.
Yeah, roundabout, yeah.
Yeah, that there's probably 3 meters, what you're seeing there. This recessed eye here.
We'd have to check the notes
Uh-huh.
and see exactly how big it is. But it's big. It is not. You have to look up on it, and you are in awe of its size. It's a monster of a stone.
And here on the top is a flattened out shelf, which does two things. Not only does it create a point where somebody could perhaps perform a ritual or some kind of offering in utilizing the animal, but it also helps define these two cranial humps that are a definer for the Notiomastodon species. They have the mastodon, the Colombian mastodon of North America, had a raised skull, but the Notiomastodon had this cranial hump, and it's absolutely, see this here? This is just like polished smooth. You can see it. See how white polished that is on the cranial hump? That could be done with exposure to weather, but then you would expect to see the same thing here on the same face, yeah?
Yeah.
Suggesting this has been polished off at the top of the head. And remember, this animal, not only was it the greatest food and tool resource for people at 10,400 BC, but it was almost, or must have been, their greatest nightmare. You know what I mean?
I can imagine an angry one of those coming after you would not have been much fun. Yeah.
The accidents, Jay, they've spent 4 days tracking it down the islands. They get it to the edge, maybe have a kill zone. They fall over and they get down there and they're happily taking the entrails out. And what happens? Wasn't dead right. Turns around and kills Bobby's uncle every week. Yeah.
It would have been perhaps the animal, apart from perhaps the fishes and the turtles, that they would have had most interaction with. Therefore, it would have commanded a respect. The same today as elephants do because of their size, or a hippopotamus or a rhinoceros.
Yeah.
They would have had a natural fear and respect for that animal. To be able to hunt it, they would have needed that.
Yeah, indeed. And to back up what Jay said, archaeologically, at Tibido dated 9,600 BC, probably contemporary with the Labra 10,400. They found giant armadillo bones, turtle bones, and reptile bones, and an assemblage of them. But what they found were a deliberate circle of Notiomastodon bones, exactly what you just said. They had ritualized that animal. Whether it was the catching of it, the consuming of it, or every part of the process of going and tracking one of those things. But yeah, there we are. This is side A and side B of that animal. And when you put all of the different pieces together anatomically, we did that because we thought it'd be great for our skeptics and for people who think we're suffering pareidolia or madness.
Or both.
Tell us which of these are incorrect. Just use the same resources as us. Go and show us that a mastodon didn't have a cranial skull or a raised eyebrow or a recessed eye. Yeah, that's what we'd love to see. I would love to think we've gone wrong here, but so far we think that's a mammoth, and we think very soon everyone's going to think that's a mammoth.
I think it's undeniable.
Let's go into this rock. This is the Mammoth Rock right here, overlooking the ancient lagoon. Nice photo, Jay.
It is a good one, actually, man. It's a good shot there.
So here's your Ice Age hunter. He's on top of the mammoth. Now, this rock here and this rock here are the three are of the same geological type. They're sandstones. Only this one that we identify as a mammoth has this. It's texturized, deeply texturized, 3-4 inches at some points, whereas the one behind it and to the left of it don't have as much as, well, they do. There's one carved line around the top, which we'll get to. But yeah,
but
we see this
texturization like this, skin effect or reptile effect that we've seen in other places. It's only that one standout rock. This is why it's not Mother Nature. Mother Nature does not choose a random rock to modify. You know, if it was done by rain, it would be on all the rocks. If it was done by the wind, it would be on all the rocks, not just one.
Yeah, and I've got a note on that, and it's that what this here kind of helps is this. Our initial hypothesis was that in the reptile temple, which is in our first documentary, you'll see it on the History Fuzz channel, that only the rocks that were identified as animals had the scaling or the snakeskin or the turtle carapace. And the ones that didn't look mammalian, animalian, they didn't have these shapes. So to find another, what we thought first was a mastodon, and then to find it on top, identified with this, that kind of supports our initial premise, right?
It confirms it.
It does. We can take losses where we hit them, Jay, but we take little wins all the way along. And I think all we need to do is find 2 or 3 more of these in different locations over the coming months. And, you know, that's a theme.
We've found 2 so far. And as I think it's worth mentioning as well, we're fully aware that there are more of these. And the actual suspected number I think they gave was 26 of them. We've only found 1. There's
Right.
25 more of these. We've identified others, but as we said before, we were limited by time, and it was just too treacherous and too dangerous to be able to attempt to get to these with the equipment that we have. In the future, we will go and we will finish exploring the site, and we will reach as many as we can, and we fully expect to find more images of megafauna as we've done before.
Yeah, and on that point, if anyone wants to help us with those costs, you can leave a super chat right now. $20 and above will be much appreciated.
That'd be great.
It'll go to, half of it will go. Half of it will go to Jay's cats.
Yeah.
So let's move on here to the secondary mastodon. Behind the one we just showed you is this rock here. On the top left is the untouched photograph. And in confession, when Jay and I were there, we saw this again: the hump on the back, the raised cranial brow, the recessed eye, the trunk coming down the front. And it was only afterwards, when we were looking at our images, we saw these protrusions, clearly fore and hind legs. Jay, go for it. What do you see? Tell us what's there.
There's no question of a doubt. This is the third that we've found. This is pushing the realms of coincidence. Now, when we compare this to the images that we showed before, and perhaps we could at a later date recompare them, this is very, very similar in its style, in its dimensions and things, to the mammoth that is in Fontainebleau in France.
Yeah.
It's almost identical, the way the trunk's made and everything. Close up on this, there's no question of a doubt this was rubbed down. It's as smooth as marble at the front.
We're about to get to that.
The rest of the rock isn't. So it's been modified. We're not saying it's been carved out of a rock. It's been modified to look like that. This is much smaller than the previous one we showed you, which suggests perhaps a mother mammoth or an adult mammoth with a younger baby mammoth behind it, walking out or looking out towards the mountain range in front.
Yeah, indeed. Listen, Jay, we're gonna pick up back there. I just need to shout out to a few people who are messaging us here. So listen, RJL at Frog Pond School, hello, and thanks for your support there. I agree with you. These are enormous examples. You know, Jay, the kind of point we made here is that there are rock arts of mammoths all over the world, but we've found the life-size 3D models, and that is exciting. And it's been RJL seen that there. And also, Kay Kessner, thanks a lot for your support there. Make sure and watch the last 2 lives we did, and make sure to subscribe to the channel, because you're going to see these films coming out regularly now as we move forward. So thanks, guys. I just wanted to see, and thanks, Jay. You're doing a great job admin in there. I'm not even having to look at the chats, hence the reason I was rude and missed you guys. So thank you. Jay, let's get back to this mammoth. Can I go back to your claim there? We were on the path. And we realized at the Reptile Temple in the first documentary that a lot of these stones, they don't look like animals from one perspective. But when you walk up the path between them, that's where you can see them framed as animals. And it was only when we were on the path on our way back down and came back from this stone, we actually saw this as perhaps the front of a mastodon. I want to show you the next image here, which shows me at the front of that animal. I'll let you see it again. So I'm standing here or right here. And this shows you the size of this. Whereas the first mastodon, we said, was between 8 and 10 meters high and perhaps 5 meters deep. Jay, this one here is 3 meters high, 3 meters deep.
I think less, Ash. It's not that much
less?
taller than you. Yeah, I think it's much less, which is why I think it suggests a baby.
I totally agree. I'm saying to you is where I can stand and touch this one's eye. I was 3 meters short of the bigger one in front of it, and
I mean, you're
what
not
we
even stood up
discovered.
straight there, are you?
No,
You
I'm not. I'm crouched. So you're right. It's about
So
what, a meter and a half
2.5.
high? Yeah, 2.5.
2.5, yeah.
2.5 meters high compared to the first one between 8 and 10. That's suggesting again it's an infant mastodon. And this front part of the nose here, when we started to see the mammoth form, we went closer and discovered that this very peak of the nose was the only part of that stone that has been obviously rubbed down, but not just rubbed down. The whole stone's rough like this, but this is taken to a high polish, like Jay points out in the documentary, a marble. And Jay, I'm going to point something out now. I'm going to let you rattle on about it, but on closer inspection, look, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The vertical scrape lines are there in the rock.
Yeah.
Seen them?
Yeah.
Equidistant, about an inch apart, and there's another patch of them appears over here. So all we're saying, what we're suggesting here is that people like us identified the loose shape of a mastodon in natural rock and needed to do no more than polish off the front to make the curvature of the trunk, knock in the eye, take a dip out of the back to highlight the hump. Now, I'm not trying to minimize the discovery, but what I'm trying to show is it's achievable. It's not like we're not claiming advanced sciences or lost technologies. We're talking about a lot of hard rubbing on a rock to make it look like an animal. Jay, over to you.
Yeah, we're not claiming that they've made this out of the rock and things like this. What we're claiming is that what we are 100% sure of, as confirmed in Fontainebleau, as these cultures did this, that they've modified a rock so as it looks even more like what perhaps they're seeing. We have to remember that pareidolia is a human instinct. So our ancestors would have had these same instincts. They might have looked at that and said, that looks a little bit like a mammoth, and let's make it look more like a mammoth. This has been, without a question of a doubt, modified and rubbed down. We can see on the texture compared to the rest of the rock, there are lines there on it which suggest tool marks. There's no other way there. Suggest tool marks. What tools they used would be speculation. We're not here to do that. What we're here to do is to say that this was definitely changed, the appearance of this rock. And judging by what we're seeing, they changed it to look like a mammoth, which means that the people who changed it were seeing these creatures on a daily basis or had a point of reference in the past that they had seen this creature.
Yeah.
These creatures went extinct. When was it actually? 10,400?
Yeah.
Before
So
the Common Era.
The Noteomastodon would be not. It didn't exist after 11,000 years ago. 9,000 BC. Boom, gone.
So 9,000 years before this Common Era. Whoever did that had seen one. So
no, mate. 11,000 years. 11,000 years before Common Era.
11,000 years
BC.
before the Common Era. Yeah.
And it's important
So that's
to get that right.
13,000 years ago. 13,000. Whoever modified this.
No, mate.
Obviously,
yes. No. Not 13,000 years ago. Let's get it absolutely right.
Go on.
It was 9,000 BC, so that's 11,000 years ago.
11,200 and something years ago. Okay, before the Common, 9,000 years before the Common Era.
BC. Whoever 9,000 years BC. It doesn't matter. Move on.
It's the same thing. This was obviously modified. The point being, whenever they did it, whoever did it had seen a mammoth or was living in the times of the mammoth. So it's very, very, very old. Yeah,
they must have seen it to render it.
And it must have been an important part of their life for them to want to do that.
Yeah, indeed.
Must have been significant for them.
Yeah. I mean, the mammoth significance is established by archaeologists all over the world in the cave art. The greatest rewards, the hardest task with the greatest rewards. Think of how long you could eat for with just one infant.
Plus the oil, plus the skin, plus the ivory, the bones they could use for tools, and even the big mammoth, the rib cages. I mean, we know that people lived inside those. They used those to form makeshift houses, which they covered in skin.
Mm-hmm. I was watching a YouTube podcast. I'll find out what it is and I'll link it to this short. But it's basically 2 archaeologists in Serbia have pretty much proven, if not got enough subjective evidence to point towards the ritualization of female mastodons and mammoths in the Ice Age. That there seemed to be, in all of the imagery, they can identify them as females in ritual contexts and whatnot. So that's fascinating too. One of the things we might look to do is bring on board somebody who can maybe help us identify the sex of these animals. Maybe signs we're not seeing.
I would suggest the fact that it's got a baby mammoth with it, that it would be the mother.
Sure.
Although we'd need an expert to distinguish these things, obviously.
But the assumption would be it's a female and her cub. Our female and her infant. Yeah, totally. So good stuff. So there's our second mammoth on I would reckon on this instance, we're about 350 meters above the 11,000 BC lagoon line at this instance. Yeah. And we're about halfway up to the top of the Camino Real, the royal road that leads up to the top of La Peña de Huayca. But we're also about 150 meters beyond the cuevas. Here is the infant cub on the right.
Calf.
The calf. I don't think it is a calf. I think they're called infant mastodon. I don't think calf applies. I tried
elephants
to find
are calves, but we'll get into that another day. But it's an elephant calf.
So there's the infant, and there's the mother, and here is the example we presented in our first documentary from across the valley on the second of the aforementioned Ice Age islands. Note your mastodon down here for visual representation always helps. This is Jay on the back of this mastodon here, and on the opposite hillside, I'm estimating, Jay, that this mammoth you found in the reptile temple is probably half the size of this one we found recently. What do you think?
Height-wise, yeah, maybe a little less than that. But the one that we discovered in Tenjo is definitely bigger. It's the biggest of all of them that we've found so far.
Mm-hmm. I wish I didn't have to cut the head off here, because you can see these double cranial bumps as well, which is just the same as this example on the right. So I wanted to put this slide up here with a wee bit about the Notiomastodon, which again is the species that was found at Elabra, dated to 10,400 and then used in ritual assemblages at 9,600 in Tibet, which are both within a 3-hour canoe from these examples that we're presenting in the center of the Bogota Savannah. We update there because look, Jay, look at that picture. Not only does it show a comparative study, we should feel proud of ourselves. Those are 3 potential Ice Age mammoths that we've presented in 2 documentaries.
I wouldn't say potential. I think it's without a doubt. And we've got a point of reference from Fontainebleau that these are identical. And as we said in the last live, we must judge this site by standard recognized archaeological paradigms. And Fontainebleau does that. And all of these fit inside those archaeological paradigms that are used to judge and justify Fontainebleau. There's no question of a doubt. There are 3, at least 3, giant mammoths here in the Andes Mountains on these once Ice Age islands.
Yep. And you're right. I shouldn't say potential. If you just look at that there. Do you know what keeps getting me about this one here is, see that squared shape under here?
Yeah.
There's like a square. So if you look at a profile of the mastodon here, they have like an old dog, they have a big blubber flab, a big fat gathering here in their esophagus. And see when you see them with their trunks down, just go Google this yourselves. You see them with their trunks down, that block of fat forms like almost a cube. And there's a cube between the body, the chest of the mammoth and the nose of the mammoth. And when I see that linear line there, it just blows me away when you see it there with the hump and with this raised head and the eye, as Jay said, in perfect ratio. If you look at an anatomical mastodon, note your mastodon.
It's the dimensions.
When you lay it on, you don't have to stretch it or skew it or move the eye back a bit or forward a bit. When you stand on the path at that flattened bit with the rock behind us, that is what you see, and it's still a thing of wonder, even talking about it, Jay, because here's the question that arises from it. Maybe people in chats can suggest answers for this. It's thought that in 16,000-year-old France, 40,000-year-old France, some of the cave paintings in Spain as well, that one day in Spain, in an Ice Age environment, a single hunter must have woken up one day and said, I'm going to draw a picture. He didn't say that, he thought it. And what he did was he made, for the first time, painted an animal on a wall, or maybe produced a clay mammoth. Somebody did it for the first time. And what we're doing here, Jay, is honing in on that very person in South America, and one of the oldest landscapes in the Americas. So did one person wake up one day in this Bogota savanna around 10,400 BC and say, let's monumentalize stones? Or was there a transmission of culture from North America with the Clovis culture that came here and just blew up a existing art style? That's what I don't know where to start with. Was it a transmission of arts or a new beginning we found the first time? What do you think?
On the scale of the amount and the size of the monuments that we found, and the fact that some are, as in Fontainebleau, propped up on smaller rocks, it suggests a labor force. There's no way one guy, no matter how big he was, you'd need Hercules or the Hulk to come and lift these rocks and push. It suggests a collaborative team, an organized effort that probably did stem from just one idea. Why don't we do this? But unlike in the caves in France, this is not just one guy who's waking up and I'm going to paint a mammoth. These are monoliths. These are 10 meters tall. These are rocks that have been moved around, that are not native to the environment we're finding them in. They're propped up on smaller rocks as well. Yeah. And the only way they could have ever moved those rocks is on canoes, because this was a lake. And to get this lake into perspective, I've said before, it's more like an inland sea. I don't mean it was salt water. I mean by the size of it, comparing it to inland seas like the Caspian Sea and things like this. This would have been perhaps 50 times bigger than modern day Bogota, which is a city of 10 million people. This was absolutely enormous. The only way to move around this would have been with coordinated transport and organization on a quite a civilized level to be able to produce this. This is the work of many people. Whether one guy came up with the idea, we don't know. We'll never know that. And maybe in a cave somewhere, and I hope we find it, somewhere in these mountains in Colombia, there is the original prototype drawing of a mammoth. But this is teamwork. This is an organized labor force, which brings about a bigger question. Who was feeding them? So if they were working on this, then a certain part of society was set aside to hunt and feed for these people, which again suggests a very organized and complex social structure. It's way beyond your hunter-gatherer living in a cave.
Yeah, so this is the paradox we're up against, because 10,400 BC in Alabra, up the valley, they were painting pictograms and creating petroglyphs. That was their level of art in the Alabra culture, which is known as one of the oldest sites in the Americas. But this here, it's so close to Alabra, but it's like, if you can imagine, Alabra and Tibito are a church where animals were ritualized and worshipped. We've found a string of cathedrals. Do you understand? It's a completely different level of the ritualization of a landscape, because
it's on a scale that was never imagined.
Yeah, because we've got the Ice Age temples out there in the first documentary, but these are satellite megasites. This isn't a small effort either, these two mastodons.
No.
And we should maybe bring in here the thing that's quite, this head warping is this. It's underneath this mastodon, this one, Jay found the pot. He found it
in the cave.
Underneath that stone in a cave, there's the stone here, the mastodon. You go down the ledge about 7 meters, and under there is the cave where he found the pot at the beginning. That quick, again, a disclaimer that the mind wants to go, hang on then. So two was the pot. Ice Age, we can't say that. We can't even start to suggest that, but it shows repeat usage of a site deemed sacred, doesn't it? That pot being underneath that cave, beneath this carved mammoth.
It suggests
somebody else saw it.
a ritualistic tradition that's ongoing.
For sure. Great. So let's move on, Jay. Let's get our skates on here. Mammoths. So these are the two mammoths we found in the most recent documentary. We say the mother and the infant. This is the one that was found in our first documentary at the provisionally named Reptile Temple. What I've done next, Jay, is I've put the two discoveries most recent in context with the pictogram that we discovered in the first documentary at the Reptile Temple, because we've now suggested that both of these creatures are Mastodons. So I'm going to let it over to you because I've not done it yet, but have a look and see what points of similarity and difference there are.
We have actually temporarily done this. The eye, the nose, the fact that it has the two legs at the front, the legs at the back.
So you're saying this is the eye here, the black dot on the pictogram, or this? Yeah, there.
The black dot.
And that here's the eye here, the recessed eye on the mastodon above the trunk.
We have the extended snout. We have two legs at the front, two legs at the back. A mammal. It's got a bulbous body on it. In proportion, and perhaps we could do this the same as you've done with the monoliths, actually. Put the eye, the trunk, the legs onto this. Obviously, it's a cruder interpretation, and it's painted, it's not carved or modified in the rock. But it has the bulbous body, it has the tail, it's a mammal, it's a big mammal with an extended snout. I mean, there's very few possibilities left as to what it can be.
No. Cool.
By a process of elimination, we've kind of, well, it's not a snake, it's not a crocodile, it's not a turtle, it's definitely not a pig, it's not a rhinoceros because they weren't here. We've narrowed down the options, and really the only option that springs out, and based and relating it to the other sites that are around it, it's a mastodon.
I'm going to show you something beautiful with you having said that. Look what I saw last night. The mastodon identified by what they call the energy hump. It's a fat reserve just behind the neck.
Like modern day camels have.
Jay, look.
Yeah.
A red hump.
Yeah. And if we look at the carving on the right, it's got that same hump on its back, man.
Right there.
Yeah.
This is why the Mastodon is different from other mastodon species, because it has, as I said, an energy hump. It could be called casually, but there's a hump there like a camel, essentially.
Yeah, like a camel has a reserve.
Fat and water. And that's why we think this is Mastodon. Perhaps this is the identifier here as well, Jay. The same hump right there on the back of the nape of the neck. Super. So there we go.
The elongated trunk, the nose, let's call it a nose at the front. There were no other animals that really have that appearance.
So we can't call it a nose and we can't call it a trunk. Because we're pros, we have to call it what it is, and that is a probensis. A probensis.
Okay, the probensis.
It probes shit. Sorry, that's the first time we've spoken on our 3 lives. I take that back. We broke every rule in the book there. We said we're going to be so above profanities. We're not even going to drop the etch bomb, but I did. I am so sorry. We are beyond above that. Let's go. Jay, we're at the end of our slides.
Okay. Very interesting, that, man. As I said before, the fact now that we've got 3 of them. 3, not one that we suspect is. We've got 3, and if we look at all 3 of them and we judge them by the same paradigms that Fontainebleau in France has been evaluated by and recognized and championed by, they all fit into those paradigms. There's no question of doubt. All we have to do now is find more. And there are more. I think every island that we go to and every expedition that we go on, we're going to be discovering these wonders, these ice age monsters that are there set in stone for eternity.
Yep. Now, Fontainebleau, let's just quickly say this. Jay's mentioned it several times. Fontainebleau, for those who don't know, was presented in our first documentary, and it's linked here in the description. It's presented because it's a site in France that dates between 44,000 BC up to the Bronze Age, and it shows enormous younger Dryas period between 9 and 14,000 BC, carvings of mastodons and serpents and turtles, just like we found in Colombia. So we used it as a comparative site to put our own site in a dateline. But what I did here deliberately in this episode or this live was this, Jay. We're gonna drop Fontainebleau to the side visually, and we're gonna compare our own discoveries with our own discoveries and keep this secular to us. How about that?
Okay.
I just felt it's great to refer to it and stuff, but I think it's more powerful to show folks, say, 3 images of stuff we've discovered rather than me using up our space by hammering home the Fontainebleaus, because they 100% is our baseline. They're archaeologically accepted Ice Age megafauna. So yeah, that's for anyone who wasn't sure what the Fontainebleau reference is. But if you go Google Fontainebleau or watch our first documentary, you'll see that what we're finding is a replication of what's been found by other archaeologists in other countries. Yeah.
Perhaps if anyone there in the chat would like to do that, and we haven't really done it, as Ash said in this film, we haven't taken the time to compare these to the images in Fontainebleau. If you'd like to do that, we'd love to hear your feedback. Any points of doubt, any points that you agree with, that you disagree with, we'd love to hear your feedback on that. And I'm sure you could talk to Jen or to Ash, and we'd love to discuss that.
Yeah, and there's an email address in the channel about section for anybody that wants to send anything in visually. We've had a few people send us in images of rocks they've discovered themselves in different parts of the world, and just been absolutely truthful with you in those emails that have come in. We haven't seen anything yet that's not natural once you actually have a look at it. And that, so what I'm seeing as well, Jay, with the things that we're getting shown to us, it makes ours stand up and out, to be really honest, because it's so far from natural. This here, we're just not sure, Jay and I, whether we're going to be alive or dead by the time that this stuff gets to the place that it really needs to be. Because what we're essentially looking at here is not just it was a ritualized site on the side of a hill, contemporary with an Ice Age culture in Colombia, a temple. But now we've found an evidence of an entire ritualized landscape, a monumentalized lagoon that didn't exist after 7000 BC in a great part. It had dropped so far, showing animals. For example, in the first documentary, we showed somewhere between 16 and 19 individual animals. Every single one of those species were existent during the younger Dryas, and many went extinct soon after. So when you have a data set of 18 models or 18 data within a set, if they all correspond with a certain timescale and failed, there's not one deer that existed to 1,000 years ago. There's no large dogs or any of the animals that were existent into modernity. These are all Ice Age creatures. I think that's real important to point out. We're not seeing anything after 9,000 BC. Do you think that's about our line? Because the Mastodon went extinct then. Yeah, I have to agree with you. And to raise the point again, the same animals, the exact same animals, are also found in our reference site in France. Yeah, indeed. Great, Jay. So listen, let's thank everybody. I'm going to say thanks for me for joining us again on another episode. Please do like and subscribe. I know it sounds so cheesy and predictable, but it really helps me get ahead on the algorithm, and it helps our films get out to more people to enjoy them and to hopefully put this series of discoveries into the correct context over time. So thank you, everybody who watches this now and in the future. Jay, you want to say a cheers? Thanks again to everybody for joining. As always, it's great fun, and it's a great opportunity for us to discuss and to put into context our discoveries. And thanks again. See you very soon. Thanks. And Jen, thank you for the admin. Thanks, Jen. See you all soon. End stream, Jay. Here we go. You're still